Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I was a signal technician for Scepter before the world collapsed. Name's Craig Lomer, 46 years old. Spent most of my life between tunnels and terminals, patching wires, resetting circuit breakers, and memorizing every emergency exit from Fern Rock down to NRG. When the outbreak hit, I was already underground. My crew and I were replacing cabling just south of City Hall Station. We thought it was just a violent protest at first, something political, until we heard the screams echoing through the station vents. Scepter shut down within hours. Most of the senior staff never even made it out of their offices. I stayed, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because the surface turned into something unrecognizable almost overnight. Fires spread down Walnut and Chestnut. The bridges were sealed. I watched a National Guard convoy get torn apart from the upper platform at 15th Street Station. The infection moved too fast, and by the time we figured out the rules, what bites meant, how fast it spread, what worked and what didn't, we were already underground. The subway became a kind of accidental refuge. The infected don't like the dark. Something about the lack of noise or light slows them down, like their senses dull when there's no stimulus. The first few weeks we barricaded entrances using everything from busted vending machines to old fare gates. Some of us took over the concourse tunnels and connected them with maintenance shafts. We called it Line Red, not after any real subway line, but for how much blood we spilled keeping it clear. Line Red grew into a settlement of maybe 70 people at its peak. Engineers, homeless folks who already knew the tunnels better than any of us, a retired transit cop named Riggs who took over organizing security. We had a working generator from the maintenance bay at Spring Garden. It gave us light, a little heat. The backup water main under Race Street still had pressure if you knew how to open the valves manually. We even had maps and working radios. For a while, it felt like we had a future. But we weren't alone down here. The Market Street holdouts came from the other side of the city. Rougher folks, mostly from the surface shelters that didn't last. Ex-cons, scavengers, and people who never wanted rules to begin with. They started appearing just after day 600. At first, it was just whispers on the radio. Someone sabotaging air ducts, cutting auxiliary power lines, scoping out tunnel cameras. Then, they hit one of our patrols, stabbed 2 of our techs, took their gear, and disappeared back into the storm drains near 40th Street portal. Riggs tried to negotiate. He sent a runner with an offer, shared space, neutral ground near 34th where we'd both have access to the westbound tunnels. The runner came back without a tongue. After that, the rules changed. We started setting perimeter zones and fallback points, labeling our maps with duct tape and spray paint. Line Red wasn't just a safe zone anymore. It became a fortress. We rigged traps in old side tunnels, tripwires attached to welding tanks, pressure plates that dropped broken fencing. But that was never enough. The Ash Dogs, as we started calling them, didn't care about losses. They used the infected, opened sealed platforms near Lombard, and flushed a dozen rotters into our main corridor. You haven't lived through horror until you've heard screams in the dark mixed with the wet slap of infected feet. We lost 14 people that night, including Myra, our only midwife. We buried her under the collapsed track bed between Race and Vine. Just concrete rubble now, twisted rebar and rust. Her husband stopped speaking the next day. He took a section of track spike and drove it into his own neck a week later. Things got worse. Supply raids turned into small wars. The infected weren't the problem anymore. They were tools, noise, camouflage. The Market Street crew figured out how to funnel herds through ventilation corridors, luring them with sound recordings or flare bursts. Sometimes they'd tie a noise trap to an infected's back and send it down a sealed maintenance shaft. That sound, distorted screaming mixed with metal-on-metal clanging, still plays in my head when I try to sleep. We started countering with hit and fade raids. I led one down into the sewer branches below Spring Garden with 2 younger guys, Nate and Rolly. Rolly had been a high school chemistry teacher. Nate used to run wiring for Comcast. That's who we were, people with useful hands who had to become killers. We had a route mapped through the overflow lines, hoping to reach the western filtration plant. There was supposed to be medical equipment stashed by a team of first responders who vanished in the early weeks. We never made it. There was a kill zone set up near a junction point under the Reading Viaduct. They'd baited the path with heat packs and MRE wrappers. Rolly took a step too far and triggered a spring trap. Rebar through the calf, left him screaming. Nate wanted to drag him back, but I saw the shadows on the upper walkway. We had no choice. I covered them while Nate got Rolly upright. I used one of our last 3 flares, lit it, and chucked it across the trench. It gave us 8 seconds of light. I remember the faces in that red flare glow. Human, but hungry. In a way the infected never looked. They weren't after brains. They wanted gear, food, and territory. They opened fire with a pistol someone must have found in a police precinct. I returned fire with a short-barreled pump action, hitting one in the shoulder and another near the jaw. Then we ran. Rolly's leg was shredded, so we carried him through the drainage lines, bleeding into the runoff. He didn't make it. Nate and I buried him in a concrete alcove near Callow Hill. I cut a symbol into the wall with my knife. Just 3 lines. It was the closest thing to a prayer we had. That was day 833. Now, 845 days in, we've fortified the concourse between 12th and 15th with welded plating from old escalator units. We've blacked out every overhead light, using just what we need to move. The silence helps. It tells us what's coming before we see it. The ash dogs haven't tried another full assault since the trap raid, but we know they're still out there, listening, waiting, starving like us. They're not just a rival group, they're becoming something else, less like survivors and more like a cult. We intercepted a recording last week on an old radio band. Static, then a voice whispering, "The red line dies with the blood it spilled." It played 3 times before the signal cut. I haven't heard anything since, but the message was clear. They've turned this war into something spiritual. The infected aren't a plague to them, they're tools, weapons, or worse, something sacred. I've seen how they move now. Not random, not reckless. They leave corpses arranged in patterns at block junctions. Sometimes the torsos point toward our perimeter walls. Sometimes we find whole bodies gutted and stacked in narrow choke points like warnings or invitations. But getting out, leaving the city entirely, isn't an option. Not anymore. The first few weeks after the outbreak, some tried. When we still thought it was localized, when quarantine zones were being established in pockets across the East Coast, people fled up Vine Street or took the Schuylkill Expressway west, hoping to reach Harrisburg or any of the temporary relocation camps they kept mentioning on the emergency broadcasts. Then, the bombing started. The military had one goal: prevent the spread. They couldn't hold the city, so they decided to crush it in place. Airstrikes targeted every major crossing point: Chestnut, Market, South Street Bridge, all reduced to skeletal ruins. They used thermobaric payloads on the Roosevelt Boulevard interchange and even cratered the rail yard near Zoo Junction, where the infected had overwhelmed the Pennsylvania Guard's last armored convoy. You can still smell the burnt asphalt and oxidized metal near those spots, even underground. Those explosions didn't just kill the infected, they buried thousands of survivors under collapsing overpasses and knocked out entire stretches of subway access. Any street-level exit north of City Hall is either choked with rubble or sealed with improvised barricades that haven't been touched in months. No supply trucks, no helicopters, no evacuation orders, just dead quiet and the occasional radio burst from someone who doesn't know we're already forgotten. We sent out recon teams in the early days, back when we were still hopeful. That stopped around day 190, after we lost 4 people trying to cross the Ben Franklin Bridge on foot. They made it halfway before the rebar gave out under the asphalt. No one came back. No one even screamed. But hope is a stubborn thing, especially when someone whispers a lead you want to believe. About 3 months ago, one of our newer additions to Line Red, an old SEPTA co-worker named Brendan Trask, came in from the South Sewer Line, claiming he knew where the city had stashed a National Guard weapons cache. Said it was in a decommissioned sub-armory tucked behind the Philadelphia Armory building, on 33rd, accessible through a maintenance duct from the underground. He swore he helped build the access hatch during a contract job back in 22. Said the place was sealed and untouched. We debated for 2 nights. Then we voted. The mission was led by Eileen Grady, our de facto commander, mid-50s, ex-fire marshal for Engine 11, and the only person who could walk through a room of armed scavengers and settle a dispute with just a look. She ran line red like a crew, not a cult. Clear jobs, rotating shifts, rules, and punishments when needed. Everyone respected her, even the worst of us. Especially the worst of us. Eileen picked 6 people for the armory run. Brendan, myself, a quiet ex-plumber named Reyes, twins from the Rail Hub team, and a younger runner named Mags. We went through the sewer route Brendan described, crawling on hands and knees through storm drains slick with runoff and soot. I don't know what I expected. Maybe dust. Maybe rats. What we found were nests. Infected don't sleep, but they gather, especially when it's cold or quiet. The lower tunnels were full of them, clumped in corners, their eyes dim, their jaws slack, standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. Like statues. It was like walking through a minefield made of corpses. We couldn't shoot. Sound down there would bring the whole city's worth of them. We used knives and crowbars, and when we had to, silence. Reyes was the first to go. One of them dropped from a pipe above, landed on him like a sack of rotted meat, and bit down on his cheek before he even got a scream out. Brendan froze. I'll never forget it. He just stood there, staring, as Reyes flailed beneath the thing's weight. Eileen put Reyes down herself. One swing with the firefighter's axe she always carried. She didn't hesitate. That was the rule. We made it to the hatch. Brendan was right about its location, but not its condition. The structure above must have collapsed partially because the entry shaft was crushed. We squeezed through a crack barely wide enough to fit, then dropped into pitch black. Inside the sub-armory, we found what we needed: crates of rounds for old military rifles, riot batons, a few handguns still sealed in plastic, and crates of tear gas we had no way to deploy safely. It should have been a win, but the ash dogs had followed us. We never heard them, never saw a shadow, but when we tried to leave, they were waiting near the crawl space, drew the infected in with a battery-powered speaker looping recorded screams. The sound echoed through the ducts and into the sewer lines. When we emerged, the tunnels were full. Not just a handful, dozens. A shambling wave of wet bodies pressed against each other, jaws open, arms swiping at anything warm. We tried to run. The twins, Shay and Jordan, were torn apart before I could even shout their names. I saw their limbs vanish under a pile of ragged clothes and snapping teeth. Mags tripped and vanished under the tide. I didn't look back. Brendan died about 50 yards from the hatch. We heard him though, crying. Not begging, just crying. Eileen pulled me out with one arm while fending off 2 infected with a broken baton. We slammed the gate shut and torched the narrow shaft behind us to prevent them from squeezing through. The rest of the walk back was silent, just footfalls and dripping water. Since then, Eileen's tightened security and cut off all sewer access points that aren't on a sealed route. We've mapped everything between 30th Street and the South Street using a mix of old maintenance charts and what we've seen ourselves. Some tunnels are stable, others are full of collapsed rebar and infected traffic. We label the ones that flood seasonally and stay out during the rains. We use the safe lines for trade now, mostly batteries, ammunition, water filters. But every group that goes out gets 2 hourglass timers and a re-entry code. If they're not back before the sand runs out, we seal the gate behind them. That's how it has to be. Sometimes we find messages carved into the sewer brick, symbols we didn't write, circles with vertical cuts through them. Sometimes we find entrails hanging from the ceiling, woven like rope. There's no question anymore. The ash dogs are down there too, and they've been digging deeper, breaching old service hatches, opening sealed storm drains. It's like they're trying to tunnel beneath us, or under something else. Eileen called a council meeting 2 days after we discovered a breached outflow shaft under 18th Street. It had been welded shut with 6-inch steel bars back in the early months, but someone had cut through, clean, precise, like they'd used an acetylene torch. The infected don't do that. Someone wanted us to know they had access to our lower routes. It wasn't the first time, but this one felt close, brazen, like a foot placed over a threshold. She didn't yell, didn't need to. Eileen stood in the center of the old station control room, the one we'd converted into a planning hub with stripped electrical panels and printed maps glued to concrete. She just looked around the room and said, "It's time we send a message back." There wasn't a vote. No one objected. After what we'd lost on the last supply run, even the civilians among us were ready for blood. The ash dogs had been taking shots from the dark for months, picking off our patrols, poisoning water cache sites, even stealing food drops before we reached them. Every month they got bolder. Now they were cutting through welded steel. It was time to strike. We planned the operation over a 2-day stretch, working off intel from our scouting teams and old blueprints we'd scavenged from a city archive. The target was an abandoned drainage inspection bunker just west of the 22nd Street tunnel extension, originally a city utilities checkpoint, long since forgotten. Our latest runner had caught sight of flickering lights inside and a cooking fire venting through a grate. More importantly, we saw movement that wasn't infected. Warm, human movement. We assembled a team of 10. 4 of ours were seasoned fighters. Myself, Eileen, Talik, a former marine mechanic, and Georgia, one of the tunnel sentries. The others were younger, quieter, not green exactly, but untested in coordinated assault. We gave them what weapons we had: 2 shotguns, 4 sidearms, a few modified pipe spears, and 3 Molotovs made from salvaged ethanol. I carried an old .45 revolver and a utility knife. Eileen had her axe and a short-barreled break-action. Talik brought the only functioning semi-auto rifle in camp, a scratched and scorched M1 carbine that still fired true. The approach route was simple: down through the mid-pressure water tunnel near Filbert Street, then into the off-map maintenance duct that would lead us behind the bunker's intake chamber. The plan wasn't to go loud at first. We wanted them scared, disoriented. And we had something special this time. Georgia had been experimenting with what we called push bait, captured infected, sedated with scavenged tranquilizers, mouths wired shut and leashed with steel cable. We'd only used them once before, during a forced breach to clear a flooded tram corridor. This time, we brought 2, chained them to an old handcart and rigged a pull release that would drop them just inside the enemy compound after the first breach. The idea was simple: panic them, scatter them, make them show themselves. We reached the staging point just after what used to be sunset. Hard to tell now without clocks or sky, but the air down there shifts, becomes stiller, colder. Talik popped the bunker vent panel with a pry hook, and Eileen gave the nod. We moved in. The first kill was silent. A sentry perched near the rusted scaffold got his throat opened by Georgia before he even noticed the noise. We rolled the bait cart forward and stacked on the bulkhead door. Inside, we could hear music, some old distorted tape loop, voices shouting, the stink of rot and sweat and scorched meat. Eileen kicked in the door. Flashlights strobed. The bait cart rolled forward. Chains snapped. 2 dead things, faces grey and slack, eyes clouded, lurched into the room, their mouths grinding open and shut without sound. The ash dogs didn't expect that. Their formation broke instantly. 2 bolted for a side door, 1 tripped over a makeshift stool, another fired wildly into the dark and hit one of his own in the leg. We went in after. Talik laid down, suppressing fire while I moved along the left wall, ducking behind a row of broken file cabinets. The infected we released did most of the work. The chaos was immediate. One of them bit into a man's thigh before being crushed under a cinder block. The other latched onto a woman's back, tearing at her with cracked fingernails until she drove herself into a pipe just to get it off. When the shooting stopped, 5 of them were dead. 1 managed to get away through a storm access hatch. We didn't follow, but we did take trophies. There were weapons, actual military hardware, not just scrap-built spears. 2 12-gauge pump actions with half a box of shells, a scoped hunting rifle, homemade explosives rigged with garage timers and cord fuse, maps, and food, canned meat, dried rice, bottled water, antibiotics, painkillers, stuff we hadn't seen in over a month. They'd been sitting on it while we rationed freeze-dried beans and powdered milk. But we paid for it too. One of the new kids, Aaron, got gutted when the woman in the back room pulled a hidden blade from her boot and drove it under his ribs. He died in Georgia's arms. We carried him back wrapped in tarp, and Eileen spoke over him before we sealed the tunnel wall with a well torch. The hit worked. It shook them. The next few days, our perimeter stayed quiet. No traps, no movement. Even the infected seemed confused, milling near blocked passages, unsure where the scent had gone. We let the silence settle, used the time to distribute what we'd taken, reinforce the barricades, and log the weapons into our registry book. Yeah, we keep one, Eileen insists. No civilization without rules, she says. Still, I can't shake the look on the woman's face as she bled out behind the boiler tank. It wasn't fear, it wasn't hate. It was calm, like she expected to die, like it was part of something she already accepted. I think the ash dogs aren't just using infected, I think they worship them. That bunker had markings we hadn't seen before, chalk outlines around the dead, symbols drawn in old blood. One wall had tally marks etched from floor to ceiling, hundreds of them. We're not sure what they count. I keep a round chambered now, even when I'm on radio duty. Eileen has started rotating sleep schedules tighter. No one sleeps more than 4 hours. All sewer access routes remain sealed unless a direct supply run is authorized. And Georgia has started training others to handle bait deployment. The days, if you can call them that, bleed together in the tunnels. No sun, no clocks, just the hum of generators and the rhythm of duty cycles. You learn to tell time by noise, the refuel cart echoing down the platform, the pipe bursts that happen when the temperature drops suddenly, the whine of bearings from our water filtration system when it starts to go dry. We survive in layers. At the top, there's what we call Concourse 0, the platform area between 12th and 15th. It used to be packed with commuters during rush hour. Now it's home to about 40 of us, give or take, spread between makeshift bunk quarters and welded shipping container rooms. We've walled off half the platform with reinforced panels, old turnstile gates, escalator frame scraps, even sheet metal peeled from elevator shafts. Everything's riveted, braced, bolted. Every square inch is accounted for. No gaps, no blind corners. That's where we sleep, eat, and rotate through jobs. Shifts on the sentry deck, maintenance rounds, tunnel clearing. Kids help strip batteries and separate copper from wiring. Teens run messages through marked paths with flash codes painted on the wall. You have to earn your space here. Eileen made that clear early on. No freeloaders, no pacifists. Everyone fights, even if it's just plugging leaks or counting rations. Beneath Concourse 0 is what we call the garden. That's Talik's territory. He built it from nothing, turning a collapsed stairwell into a vertical hydroponic column, using scavenged tubing and broken plastic sheeting. He rigged grow lights from emergency signage and wired the whole thing into the generator grid. We don't grow much, mostly sprouting potatoes, kale, onions, a few stubborn carrots, but it's green, and it's real. You can stand in there and smell chlorophyll and damp soil, and for a minute, you remember what the world felt like before it drowned in ash and rot. We mix what we grow with canned food from raids. Most of it expired long ago, but we don't have the luxury of tossing things out. Anything not bloated or rusted goes through the food prep table, boiled, strained, portioned. Georgia keeps the tally book, who ate what, how much, how long it has to last. We supplement with what little meat we catch. Sometimes it's rats, sometimes sewer frogs. Occasionally someone gets lucky and traps a feral dog. Water comes from the old main under Race Street. We tapped into it early with a manual pump and 3-stage filtration system. It takes hours to fill even a few canisters, but it's cleaner than the surface runoff. We boil everything before it's used. Eileen tested it for days before she let anyone drink. Said she wasn't about to trade rotters for dysentery. We've been lucky so far. The infected don't just wander in anymore. They have to be forced, or led. The deeper we go, the fewer we find. It's like something's pushing them upward, but we still skirmish regularly. Quick bursts, sudden lunges from tunnels we thought were empty. Ambushes from corpses we didn't realize still had movement left. They don't decay like they should. Something in the virus, or fungus, or whatever it is, keeps them mobile even when their organs are gone. One of our scouts swore he saw a torso crawling without arms, dragging itself forward with its jaw clenching along the concrete. He put it down with a pipe wrench and didn't sleep for 3 days after. Fighting the infected is different than fighting the ash dogs. There's no thought in it, no malice, just hunger and inertia. They keep moving even after you shoot them. You have to break the spine, crack the skull, or reduce the limbs. We don't waste bullets if we don't have to. Blunt tools, blades, fire when it's safe. Talik crafted a series of spike bats with rebar cores wrapped in old grip tape. He calls them husk beaters. Every day, we clear at least one tunnel, sometimes just for exercise. Other times because we've mapped signs of pressure buildup, rotting biomass that might collapse a ventilation path or block a safety route. Georgia leads most of those teams. She's brutal in the best way, quick, sharp, efficient. She doesn't gloat when she kills, doesn't shout orders, just moves forward and expects you to do the same. People follow her because they trust she'll walk back out of the dark. We burn the bodies when we can, usually in the old southbound trench, where the airflow draws smoke out through a shattered duct that leads near the Schuylkill. If the wind's right, you can smell it for blocks, like barbecue and bleach. On bad days, we use lime instead and wall the corpses off behind old debris. There's a whole section of tunnel we call the shelf, stacked with infected we couldn't risk burning. We don't go back there. Sometimes, in the middle of all this, someone breaks. Last week, a man named Elroy, used to be a city parks worker, walked out past the perimeter without a word, left his weapon behind. No boots, just stepped over the warning line and vanished into the dark. We found his body 4 days later at the base of an elevator shaft near 13th Street. No bites, just his wrists opened with a piece of jagged metal he must have pocketed. Eileen didn't say much, just tightened duty rosters and had us move the younger kids' quarters closer to the garden, where the lights stay on longer. Sometimes, she and I take turns patrolling the central corridor in shifts that overlap, just so there's never a moment without eyes. We've learned the hard way what happens when we assume silence is safety. The mental weight is heavier than the physical. You can train someone to kill. You can teach them how to load a weapon, how to set a snare or drive a nail through a spine. But you can't make them forget what they had to become to live down here. The fights aren't always loud. Sometimes it's two people screaming over a can of beans, or a kid hoarding crackers because he saw his friend starve last winter. But Line Red holds, because we hold each other. Every week, we light 3 candles, one for the dead, one for the living, one for what we've yet to lose. It's a dumb ritual maybe, but it gives people a marker, something to remind them time still moves forward, even if the clocks don't. The ash dogs haven't shown themselves again, but we've seen signs. Scouting cameras go missing, tripwires are cut. Once we found one of our own people gagged and left hanging by the wrists in an unused stairwell, alive, barely, eyes wide open and blood frozen to his lips. No ransom note, no demands, just a scrap of cloth tied around his neck bearing the circle with cut symbol. Talik says we should start hitting them again. Preemptive strikes, fire, traps, bait. He's been designing a plan to collapse part of the old tunnel under Logan Square and bury one of their known patrol routes in 300 tons of brick. Georgia's been silent, but I see her sharpening that same long blade she used on the last op. Eileen's thinking, always thinking, not rash, not yet. But if something doesn't break soon, if we don't reclaim some upper ground or break their rhythm, I think she'll make the call. But this war has changed. It's not just scavengers we're fighting anymore. The ash dogs have become something else. It's not just the way they strike, coordinated, methodical, always just far enough from our perimeter to avoid open conflict. It's what they leave behind. Symbols drawn in blood, stacked corpses arranged in shapes, heads turned to face the same direction. At first, we thought it was just intimidation, psych warfare, but there's more to it, a structure, a message, maybe even a belief. We've started calling their leader Father Harrow. That's not his real name. We don't even know if it's a man or a title. But the name stuck. Some of the graffiti we found in the upper tunnels near Spring Garden used the phrase, "by Harrow's will." Others said, "The flesh is a gift." One was burned into an old mattress frame, letters warped and scorched, but clear. Scouts reported seeing robed figures moving through the tunnels, not just scavenged rags or makeshift armor, actual robes. Fabric dyed with ash and oil, often marked with the split circle symbol. They don't run, don't carry scavenged gear. They walk slowly, heads bowed, sometimes barefoot. One of our teams followed a pair of them through an abandoned side corridor near Franklin Square Station. They didn't seem armed, didn't even react to being followed. When the scouts got too close, a group of infected came stumbling down the far end of the tunnel, guided by a noise trap, something the cultists had likely placed earlier. One of the scouts, Briggs, swore the cultists never even flinched when the infected passed right beside them, said they stood still, arms folded, as the rotters brushed past their cloaks without attacking. Maybe the infected didn't see them. Maybe they were masked with scent. Or maybe it was something worse. 2 days later, another team found what used to be a small underground chapel, probably one of those community outreach spaces built into the concourse back when the city wanted to make the subways feel safer. It had been rebuilt, replastered with debris and padded with layers of cloth and wax. The pews were gone, replaced with bones, human bones, stacked in lines like sacred benches. In the center was a crude altar made from a broken fair machine and surgical tables, blood-caked and still wet in places. On the walls, they'd written verses in red. The world above was claimed by the careless. Only flesh walks in truth. Feed the roots, feed the root, feed the rot. There were candles, real ones, salvaged from God knows where. Some even scented. They still burned when we found the place. That meant the ash dogs were close, watching, maybe even waiting for us to enter. Eileen ordered us not to touch anything. We left without taking a single scrap, not even the canned food we saw stacked neatly behind the altar. It felt like bait, or worse, an invitation. Whoever Harrow is, he's not just leading them, he's reshaping them, turning a pack of ruthless raiders into something religious, ritualistic, dangerous in ways bullets don't stop. Prisoners we've taken, few and far between, won't speak. We had one last month, a young man with one ear torn clean off and ritual scars on his chest. Georgia caught him trying to cut through a sealed pressure tunnel with a hacksaw, completely exposed to open space. He didn't resist, didn't blink, didn't even try to run. We bound him, fed him, gave him water. Eileen tried talking to him, calmly, humanely. He just muttered over and over, "The ash walks, the root waits. We feed, and we are fed." He bit through his own tongue sometime during the night, choked on the blood, died smiling. The ash dogs used to steal food and scrap. Now they leave it behind. One patrol found a crate of food from one of our missing resupply teams, stacked neatly outside the water filtration gate, untouched except for a small slip of paper resting on top. It said, "A gift for the blind. One day you'll see." No one ate it. We burned the crate. Talik thinks they've set up some central compound now, maybe more than just a bunker or forward post. He believes the church isn't just symbolic, it's operational. Command and control, a place where Harrow gathers his flock and speaks. Talik says they've sealed off the old Catherine Street spur line, reinforced the entrances, and even rerouted storm water manually to flood alternate approaches. We have no way to confirm. Our last drone rig was pulled apart by scavengers 3 months ago. Our only eyes now are human. Some of the younger ones have started asking questions, half in fear, half in awe. They want to know what Harrow is, how he controls the infected, if he's immune, if he used to be a priest. One girl said she heard that Harrow used to be CDC, working on early containment, and snapped after watching too many people die. Another swears he's not real at all, just a name passed from fanatic to fanatic, like a ghost story in Boots. It doesn't matter. The damage is the same. We don't need a prophet with a face. We just need enough lunatics who believe in him. Eileen hasn't said much, but I can tell it's eating at her. Every time a scouting patrol comes back rattled by cult sightings, she draws tighter into herself. Her orders get more methodical, more rigid. I think she knows that fighting raiders is one thing, but fighting zealots? That's a different war. We've started seeing more ritual markings deeper in our safe zones, symbols scratched into old concrete columns, often placed where we wouldn't notice unless we were checking for structural damage. We're not sure how they got in. Either someone snuck past our patrols, or someone on the inside is helping them. That idea keeps me up at night more than the infected ever did. Eileen's considering a forward incursion to flush out the Catherine Street compound, if it exists. But we can't commit without risking collapse elsewhere. Every fighter we send is a tunnel left with one less watch. Every step forward is another place for them to slip behind us. And they know it. This cult isn't built on chaos. It's built on time, patience, infection of thought, not just blood. They don't want to kill us outright. They want us to see what they see, to believe, to break first. And if we don't, they'll burn us and sing while we burn. We've seen their hymns. One of our runners, Kessler, a skinny kid with a cracked voice and endless curiosity, was trailing a known Ashdog patrol route near the old trolley access beneath Catherine Street. He found a rolled scrap of synthetic cloth pinned to a wall with a bone shard. On it, written in smeared red ink or maybe something worse, were verses, chant-like refrains repeating the same words over and over. To rot is to rise is to rot is to rise. That same line scrawled 6 times. At the bottom, a crude sketch of what looked like a human face split open like a flower. No eyes, no teeth, just flayed skin and something blooming out of it. Kessler hasn't been the same since. He didn't speak for days after finding that scroll, just stared at his hands and mumbled when spoken to. Eileen kept him off rotation, gave him the cot closest to the water pipes where the noise drowns out your thoughts. We didn't push him. No one comes back from a direct glimpse into cult territory unchanged. We're stretched thin, morale is brittle, food stores are tighter than ever. The garden's fungal crop failed last week. Something in the hydro line contaminated the irrigation system. Talik's been trying to clean it out, but most of the plants wilted overnight. That was our winter green ration gone. We still have canned goods, but it'll mean cutting portions again. People don't riot down here, not openly, but hunger has a sound. You hear it in the coughs, the pacing, the way utensils scrape empty bowls longer than they should. We needed a win, and we got one. Sort of. 5 days ago, just past midnight rotation, Georgia called for a silent lockdown. She and a maintenance crew were doing wiring inspections in the lower ventilation ductwork when they saw movement along a blind service tunnel. Someone creeping through the dark without light, hands bare, no weapon. Georgia signaled for her team to flank. No call-outs, no hesitation. When they pinned the man down, he didn't resist, just dropped to his knees and held out his hands. He was one of ours. Name's Owen Furl. Used to work sanitation back in the first 100 days. Disappeared during a tunnel breach. Everyone assumed he was either turned or killed. We even etched his name on the comm wall, but there he was. Breathing, bleeding, emaciated and wrapped in something that looked like butchered clothing, woven with old prayer beads. They brought him in under escort, cuffed and flanked by 3 guards. Eileen sat him in the center of the control room and didn't say a word for the first 2 minutes. Neither did he, just looked around the space like he'd stepped through a memory that no longer belonged to him, like he was floating outside his own skin. When he did speak, his voice was cracked and dry, like someone who hadn't used it in weeks. He didn't beg for mercy, didn't explain himself, just said this: "They're getting ready." No one spoke. Not Talik, not Georgia, not even Eileen. "They're waiting for the last freeze," Owen said. "Then they move." We pressed him for more, of course. Eileen kept the question steady, not aggressive. "We're not animals, not yet." He said the cult doesn't go by Ashdogs anymore, not internally. They call themselves the Bloom. Harrow isn't just their leader, he's their vessel. They believe he hears the voice of the rot itself, that the infected aren't the end of the world, but the first sign of its renewal. That this new life, this bloom of death, is purging the world of liars and cowards. What remains, they say, is purity, flesh without fear, movement without mind. Owen didn't call it faith, he called it truth. He described their rituals, how they break down the ego, how they isolate newcomers in complete silence for 7 days, then feed them broth made from rot-washed roots and fermented fungus. How they're made to stare into the faces of the infected, chained to walls, until the panic breaks and something else settles. After that, they're no longer scared, just hollow, just waiting. He said they rebuilt the chapel entirely, not just once, again and again. Every breach, every fire, every collapse, they dig it back out. The root, he said, always finds the surface. Eileen asked why he left. His hands trembled. He didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, "Because I still remember her voice." We don't know who she was. Maybe someone from before the fall. Maybe someone he watched die. Doesn't matter. Something in him cracked through whatever the cult did to his mind, and now he's here. Or maybe he was sent. That possibility hangs in every silence since. Georgia wants him interrogated harder. Talik suggested a test, injecting him with diluted infected blood to see how he reacts. We vetoed that. Eileen believes in lines, and for all her steel, she's still got a spine made of something old, something like law. For now, Owen is locked in one of the old signal relay rooms, watched around the clock. No weapons within reach. No contact with anyone outside command. But the damage is done. Word spread fast. Whispers in the sleeping quarters. Speculation over cold stew. People want to know if he's telling the truth. If the bloom really has a plan. If the freeze is coming. And if it does, what happens when the cult moves? The cold has already started. Temperature dropped hard 2 nights ago. Pipes crackle at shift change. Condensation forms in the upper walkways and drips like sweat from the stone. Infected move slower in cold, but they cluster tighter. And if the bloom strategy is built on drawing herds and pushing us with them, then they'll use the weather like a weapon. Eileen knows it too. She's moved our fallback supplies out of the central depot and into smaller caches around the perimeter, rotated fire teams to double duty, shifted the sentries to overlapping angles in case of a pincer move. She's not waiting for spring. None of us are. But the fear isn't in the cold, it's in the silence that follows. 3 nights back, the radios picked up a signal we haven't heard before. No voice. Just static, low at first, then rising in pitch like feedback crawling up a metal spine. After 40 seconds, a voice whispered 2 words. "Below Logan," then nothing. We traced the transmission to an old signal repeater somewhere near the collapsed Green Line junction. But we can't reach it safely. That section's been sealed since the riots. If they've opened it, it means they've got range. Maybe even their own relay network. And if that's true, we're not just dealing with scavengers or zealots. We're dealing with something organized, something preparing. Eileen gathered the senior team the next morning in the radio room. Just her, Talik, Georgia, myself, and one of the youngest sentries, Lena, who'd been logging all the frequency spikes we'd recorded over the last month. We laid out the maps, pinned with flags and markers, drawing a jagged arc through our defensive perimeter. It didn't take much imagination to see what it resembled. A net. A slow, silent, tightening net, with Concourse 0 right at the center. The bloom wasn't just waiting. They were moving, preparing the corridors, spreading influence, tunneling under and around us. And now, they had a voice. That signal, below Logan, wasn't a threat. It was a signal to someone else. A command, a trigger. Eileen made the call. We had to hit them before they completed whatever they were building. No more waiting, no more responding. She chose 10 of our best, Georgia, Talik, myself, and a squad that had handled sewer combat before. 3 days of preparation followed. We rigged Molotovs from fuel alcohol and steel tubing, sharpened rebar spears, checked every sidearm twice, and tested battery packs for headlamps. No margin for failure. We all knew this was going to be the last big operation for a while. Maybe ever. Owen, the defector, sat in the relay room with Lena during those days, talking in circles. He never asked to join the mission. He never begged for forgiveness. But he did say one thing that chilled me more than anything we saw out there. They don't fear death anymore. They've burned it out of themselves. What they worship now isn't life or death. It's change. On the 4th day, we left before cycle reset. Slipped through the bypass drain under 17th, and followed the loop west toward Logan Square. The way had been sealed since the riot weeks, blocked with rubble and an old support collapse. But Georgia had scouted a detour, an old electric tram access shaft once used for night inspections. It stank of rot and oil, but it was dry, quiet, and mostly clear. We found the first marker about halfway in, chalk lines on the wall, spirals with hash marks through them. A scent hung in the air, bitter and damp, like something long dead had been soaked in candle wax. We followed it. The repeater station near the Green Line was intact, somehow. That was the first real shock. We'd expected rubble, maybe twisted rebar and smashed antennae, but instead we found an old access terminal wired into a fully functional transmitter, powered by a crank battery system built from salvaged parts. It had been modified, amplified. It could broadcast across half the tunnel network. There were no guards, no traps, just the signal, still humming in low static on loop. Below Logan, below Logan, below Logan. We disabled the signal and followed the reinforced ductwork. That's when we found the hatch. Old subway engineers had built side tunnels throughout Philadelphia. Most people don't even know they exist. Emergency bypasses, bomb shelters, crawl spaces between lines. This hatch was part of one, and it had been welded open from the inside. Someone had been using it frequently. We descended into what we thought would be a forgotten conduit. Instead, we found the bloom. The air changed before the first step. Heavier, not hotter, but thicker. It smelled like old rust, human skin, and damp earth. The tunnel ahead wasn't natural anymore. The walls had been scrubbed of markings, then recovered with clay and soot. Symbols repeated along the curvature, circles, spines, flower-like patterns that made no logical sense but felt deliberate. Someone had spent weeks, maybe months, carving them with precision. The ground was packed with old cloth and scraps of bone. Candles burned in alcoves made from human skulls. Real ones. We counted 23 before we stopped counting. The cult's chapel wasn't just rebuilt, it had expanded. What used to be a one-room space with benches and a crude altar had transformed into a sprawling chamber, carved into the side of the old train tunnel. The ceiling was reinforced with support beams from maintenance depots. The floor had been covered in rubber mats stripped from gymnasiums or playgrounds. In the center stood the altar again, this time higher, built of welded panels and medical stretchers. On it, something laid still, covered in a sheet. We didn't move closer. The bloom was there. Dozens of them, at least 40. Some knelt, some stood in circles with arms stretched wide. Most wore cloaks, veils, or bandages. No weapons we could see. No armor. Just scars, and stitched skin, and silence. And then Harrow stepped out. We think it was him. No face visible. Just a long coat made from wrapped tarpaulin and stitched leather, layered with markings etched into the surface. A hood covered everything but the mouth. A mouth that didn't move much but didn't have to. When he lifted his arms, the entire chamber bowed their heads. No chants. No music. Just synchronized stillness. Talik raised his rifle. Eileen told him to wait. Then the lights flickered. All at once, candles began going out. The far end of the chamber glowed faintly with movement, bodies emerging from side tunnels. Infected. Dozens. All muzzled. All shackled. All being led. The bloom had domesticated them, or at least tried. Each infected had a handler, robed figures guiding them like pets on rope leads, and then Harrow turned toward us. No fear, just focus. His hands rose. That was when the first Molotov hit. Georgia moved first. She lit and threw before the order even came. The fire burst across the front row of kneeling zealots. Screams erupted, but no one ran. They stood. They burned standing up. Some staggered, arms wide, as if embracing the fire. Then all hell broke. The handlers released the infected. They surged forward, eyes milky, jaws tearing through air and cloth alike. Talik opened up with the M1, dropping 2 handlers before they reached us. Georgia went to the blade, slicing through soft stomachs and robed torsos. I used the revolver sparingly, saving every shot for the ones that broke the line. Eileen shouted for a breach, target the altar, clear the chamber. We moved in pairs, flanking and pushing. The bloom resisted, but not like soldiers. They didn't duck, didn't flee. They offered themselves, stepping into blows, slowing us with bodies, screaming praise as they died. We made it to the altar. What lay beneath the sheet was human, or had been. A body cut open, chest cavity hollowed and filled with compost and fungal matter. Roots grew from its ribs, eyes removed, replaced with bulbous mold. Whatever the bloom believed, it had taken them too far. Eileen ordered the room burned. We laid charges. Fire spread fast across the dry cloth and bone. Even as the smoke thickened, the bloom chanted, "Finally, to rot is to rise, to rot is to rise." Over and over, and then Harrow vanished in the smoke. One moment standing atop the far dais, the next gone behind a curtain of black. We didn't chase, we retreated. We lost two, Santo and Dee, both overrun during the breach. Georgia carried Dee's body back on her shoulders, refusing to drop her even when her leg gave out. Talik limped with a gash down his thigh. I lost hearing in one ear from a ruptured round fired too close. Eileen was covered in blood, not hers. But we made it back. We collapsed the tunnel behind us with 2 debt charges, and a train axle dropped from a service crane, sealed it in concrete and silence. Owen was gone when we returned, slipped his lock somehow, no sign of a break-in, just a message scratched into the inside of his chamber wall with a screw. The root never dies. Maybe the bloom isn't dead. Maybe Harrow escaped. Maybe we delayed something we don't yet understand. But we hit back. We burned the heart of their belief. And down here, under this city of ash and cold, that means something. We still hold the line, for now. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.